My mom's farmland wasn't just a piece of property. It was our family's heart and soul. It stretched across 2,100 acres of rolling green hills, fertile soil, and open skies. For 3 generations, this land had been the foundation of everything we held dear. My great-grandfather worked tirelessly to clear the fields by hand. My grandmother nurtured crops that fed families during tough times, and my mom poured her life into keeping it alive. Every blade of grass, every tree, and every corner of that land carried stories of hard work, love, and resilience. When Mom passed away unexpectedly last year, I didn't just lose her. I inherited the weight of her legacy. Along with it came her battles, and one of those battles felt insurmountable. The Homeowners Association, HOA, of Ridgewood Estates, an exclusive gated community filled with million-dollar homes, had somehow claimed most of what used to be our asterisk land. What once grew corn and wheat now hosted manicured lawns, sparkling pools, and luxury mansions. All that remained for us was a small patch near the edge of the property, just enough to remind me of what we'd lost. At first, I felt powerless. These people weren't just wealthy. They were organized, connected, and intimidating. They wore expensive suits, drove fancy cars, and acted like they owned the world. And in a way they did, at least when it came to our land. But something inside me refused to give up. Mom always told me, "You don't need fists to win a fight. You need leverage." She was right. And as it turned out, I had more leverage than anyone realized. One day, while sorting through old papers in Mom's attic, I stumbled upon a folder labeled Utility Records. Inside, there were documents about a power substation located on our remaining land. At first glance, it seemed unremarkable, a technical detail buried among countless others. But then I noticed something unusual. The substation, which supplied electricity to the entire HOA development, was still registered under Mom's name. Not theirs. Ours. The realization hit me like a lightning bolt. Without realizing it, the HOA had built their entire empire on infrastructure they didn't control. Their shiny homes, their security systems, their perfect lives, all of it depended on a power grid that technically belonged to *me*. Suddenly, the tables turned. These people thought they were untouchable, but they had no idea who they were dealing with. I spent days researching, reading every document I could find. The more I learned, the angrier I became. How could they take something so precious from us? Did they think no one would notice? Or worse, did they assume we wouldn't fight back? Whatever their reasoning, they underestimated me. Big mistake. As I sat on the porch overlooking the fields where I grew up, I made a silent promise to Mom. I wouldn't let them get away with this. I didn't have money or influence, but I had something better. Knowledge. Knowledge that gave me power. Power to change everything. For weeks, I kept quiet, biding my time and planning my next move. I knew going head-to-head with the HOA wouldn't be easy. They had lawyers, resources, and decades of practice pushing people around. But I had something they didn't: determination. Determination to protect what was rightfully ours and expose the truth about how they'd stolen it. Little did they know, their days of unchecked power were numbered. The discovery of the power substation documents felt like finding a hidden treasure map. It wasn't gold or jewels, but it was something far more valuable: leverage. For the first time since inheriting Mom's land, I felt a flicker of hope. But before jumping into action, I knew I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with. These weren't just ordinary neighbors. They were part of a well-oiled machine that thrived on control and intimidation. To take them on, I had to be smarter, quieter, and more strategic. I started by digging deeper into the HOA's history. My lawyer, Sarah, became my closest ally. She spent hours combing through old deeds, court records, and financial statements, piecing together how the HOA had managed to claim so much of our land. What she uncovered shocked even her. The HOA hadn't just bought the property legally. They'd forged signatures, falsified documents, and manipulated the system to erase any trace of our family's ownership. They bribed officials, silenced dissenters, and bulldozed their way into taking what wasn't theirs. Every revelation made my blood boil, but it also fueled my resolve. While Sarah handled the legal side, I decided to go undercover. Disguised as a maintenance worker, I began spending time in Ridgewood Estates, observing the people who lived there and learning how the community operated. At first glance, it seemed picture-perfect. Mansions lined wide streets, gardens burst with color, and children played on manicured lawns. But beneath the surface, cracks were beginning to show. Residents whispered about rising fees and crumbling infrastructure. The HOA demanded absurd amounts of money for everything, from replacing broken tiles to repainting mailboxes, and punished anyone who questioned them. Fines piled up quickly, often without explanation, leaving families struggling to keep up. Some residents had even been evicted because they couldn't pay. The fear in their eyes was palpable. These weren't proud homeowners. They were prisoners in their own paradise. At the center of it all was Victor Langston, the CEO of the HOA. He was the epitome of arrogance, a tall, sharply dressed man with an air of superiority that made your skin crawl. Victor ruled Ridgewood Estates like a king, expecting absolute loyalty from everyone around him. His word was law, and anyone who dared oppose him faced consequences. Rumors swirled about how he'd ruined lives, bankrupted businesses, and destroyed reputations, all to maintain his grip on power. But the more I watched Victor, the more I realized something important. He wasn't invincible. Beneath his polished exterior lay a man obsessed with control. Control over the land, the people, and every detail of the community. And now, thanks to the power substation, I** held the key to disrupting that control. One evening, while walking through the neighborhood, I noticed a group of residents gathered near the clubhouse. They were talking heatedly about yet another fee hike and speculating about why repairs always took so long. Listening to their frustrations gave me an idea. If I wanted to bring down the HOA, I couldn't do it alone. I needed allies, people who were already tired of living under Victor's thumb, people who wanted change but didn't know how to fight for it. By the time I left Ridgewood Estates that night, my mind raced with possibilities. I had leverage, knowledge, and a growing sense of purpose. The HOA thought they were untouchable, but they didn't realize one crucial thing. Their entire empire depended on something they didn't own. Something I** controlled. All I had to do was pull the right strings and watch the dominoes fall. With my plan beginning to take shape, I knew I had to tread carefully. The HOA wasn't just a group of people. It was a fortress built on rules, money, and fear. If I wanted to dismantle it, I needed to exploit its weaknesses without tipping them off too soon. That meant starting small, testing the waters before making any big moves. The first step was understanding how much power I truly had over their daily lives. Literally, the substation on my family's remaining land supplied electricity to the entire Ridgewood Estates development. Without it, their perfect little world would come crashing down. But instead of cutting the power right away, I decided to experiment. Late one night, using access codes left behind by my late uncle, a former utility worker, I remotely shut down the substation for exactly 10 minutes. It didn't take long for chaos to unfold. Streetlights flickered out, plunging the neighborhood into darkness. Security systems failed, leaving expensive homes vulnerable. Alarm clocks blared uselessly in pitch-black bedrooms, waking residents who stumbled outside confused and panicked. By morning, whispers of sabotage spread like wildfire through Ridgewood Estates. People were scared and angry. Victor Langston, the HOA's CEO, called an emergency meeting that same day. He stood at the podium looking shaken, his usual confidence replaced by thinly veiled panic. "This is unacceptable," he bellowed, slamming his fist on the table. "Whoever did this will be held accountable." Sitting in the back row, I couldn't help but smile. Phase 1 of my plan had worked perfectly. They had no idea who or what was behind the outage, and already cracks were forming in their polished facade. But this was only the beginning. I needed to keep them guessing, keep them uneasy, until they realized just how vulnerable they really were. Later that night, I sent an anonymous email to every resident in Ridgewood Estates. It was simple but effective. Within hours, the email went viral among residents. Suspicion turned to outrage as people began questioning the HOA's competence and honesty. Victor tried to dismiss the message as a prank, but his excuses rang hollow. The more he denied responsibility, the angrier everyone became. For the first time, I saw glimpses of rebellion brewing beneath the surface. Meanwhile, I continued gathering allies. Margaret, a retired journalist with a sharp mind and sharper pen, agreed to help expose the HOA's corruption. Tom, a contractor of thousands in unpaid invoices, jumped at the chance to fight back against the organization that had exploited him. And Lisa, a single mother drowning in fines, vowed to rally other struggling families. Together, we formed a secret coalition, ordinary people united by a shared goal, to take down Victor and his regime. Each new ally brought fresh insights and ideas. Margaret suggested leaking documents to local news outlets. Tom proposed staging protests outside the HOA offices. Lisa offered to organize petitions demanding transparency. With each meeting, our plan grew stronger, and so did my confidence. These weren't just victims of the HOA's greed. They were fighters ready to reclaim their voices. As I watched the pieces fall into place, I felt a surge of determination. The HOA thought they were untouchable, but they'd underestimated us. They'd stolen our land, manipulated our lives, and silenced anyone who dared oppose them. Now, it was our turn to strike back. One blackout at a time, we were going to show them that even the most powerful empires could crumble when you hit them where it hurts. The anonymous email sent shockwaves through Ridgewood Estates, and I couldn't have been more pleased with the results. Residents who had once quietly accepted the HOA's iron grip were now buzzing with questions and suspicions. Whispers turned into heated conversations at grocery stores, parks, and school drop-offs. People wanted answers, and they weren't shy about demanding them. Victor Langston tried to brush it off as a technical glitch, but his explanation didn't hold water. The outage wasn't random. It was too precise, too calculated. And the timing of my email, right after the blackout, wasn't lost on anyone. For the first time, residents started looking at the HOA not as their protectors, but as potential culprits in their own misery. I decided to keep the pressure on. A few nights later, I triggered another brief power outage, this time during dinner hour. Ovens switched off mid-cooking, refrigerators stopped humming, and TVs went dark just as families settled in for the evening. By morning, social media groups dedicated to Ridgewood Estates were flooded with complaints. Some joked about it being a ghost haunting the neighborhood, while others angrily accused the HOA of incompetence or worse. Victor called another emergency meeting, his frustration evident. He paced the stage like a caged animal, snapping at anyone who dared ask tough questions. "We're doing everything we can to fix this," he shouted, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. But his words fell flat. The more defensive he became, the less people believed him. That night, I sent another anonymous email. This time, the response was explosive. Residents began openly criticizing the HOA at community meetings. They demanded detailed financial reports, explanations for rising fees, and proof that their dues were being used responsibly. Margaret, my journalist ally, started digging deeper, uncovering evidence of mismanaged funds and lavish spending by the HOA board. Tom shared stories of contractors stiffed on payments, while Lisa rallied mothers frustrated by excessive fines. Slowly but surely, the cracks in Victor's empire widened. But I knew better than to let up. Every few days, I'd cut the power again, just long enough to remind everyone who really held the reins. Each blackout came with a new message, each one more pointed than the last. I encouraged residents to band together, to demand accountability, and to refuse to back down until real changes were made. Behind the scenes, our coalition grew stronger. We met secretly in basements and garages, strategizing ways to expose the HOA's corruption. Margaret drafted press releases, Tom designed protest signs, and Lisa organized rallies. Everyone played a role, united by a common goal: justice. Victor grew increasingly desperate. He hired private investigators to track down the source of the emails and blackouts, but all they found were dead ends. Meanwhile, public opinion continued to turn against him. Even some members of the HOA board began distancing themselves from Victor, fearing association with his sinking ship. As I watched the chaos unfold, I felt a mix of satisfaction and resolve. The HOA thought they could crush anyone who opposed them, but they hadn't counted on resistance from within. Piece by piece, their carefully constructed facade was crumbling, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. The tipping point came faster than I expected, but it wasn't just because of the blackouts or the anonymous emails. It was the growing unity among the residents of Ridgewood Estates that truly shook Victor's empire to its core. For years, fear had kept people silent, isolated, and compliant. But now, cracks were forming in that wall of silence, and light was pouring through. Margaret, with her sharp instincts and knack for storytelling, published an expose in the local newspaper. The article detailed everything she'd uncovered: forged documents, illegal land grabs, and millions funneled into personal accounts controlled by Victor and his inner circle. She included quotes from disgruntled residents, unpaid contractors, and even former HOA employees who described a culture of greed and intimidation. Within hours, the story went viral, sparking outrage far beyond our neighborhood. Tom took things a step further by organizing protests outside the HOA offices. Armed with homemade signs that read "Enough is enough" and "Victor outit," dozens of residents gathered daily to voice their frustrations. News crews showed up, eager to cover the scandal unfolding in what was once considered one of the most prestigious communities in the region. Each protest drew more attention and more participants. People who had been too scared to speak out before now felt empowered to join the fight. Lisa became the face of the movement, especially for families struggling under the weight of oppressive fines and fees. She started a petition demanding reforms within the HOA, gathering thousands of signatures in just days. Her speeches at community meetings were passionate and raw, often bringing tears to the eyes of those listening. "We're not asking for perfection," she told the crowd during one particularly powerful address. "We're asking for fairness, for transparency. Is that really too much?" Meanwhile, I continued my own campaign of disruption. Every few nights, I'd trigger another short blackout, always timed to coincide with key events organized by the HOA. Board meetings plunged into darkness mid-presentation. Security cameras failed during protests. Even Victor's own mansion lost power one evening while he hosted a dinner party for influential friends. Each incident reinforced the message: no one was safe until justice was served. Victor tried to cling to power, but his usual tactics weren't working anymore. Threats of fines and evictions only fueled the rebellion. When he attempted to smear Margaret as a troublemaker, other residents rallied around her, defending her work as courageous and necessary. His attempts to discredit Tom fell flat when contractors came forward with proof of unpaid invoices, and every time he attacked Lisa, more families joined her cause, determined to protect their homes and futures. By the time the final showdown arrived, Victor looked like a man on the edge of collapse. Haggard and desperate, he called yet another emergency meeting, hoping to regain control of the narrative. But this time, the crowd wasn't there to listen. They were there to demand answers. As Victor stumbled through excuses and half-truths, voices rose in dissent. Residents shouted questions, refusing to let him dodge accountability. That's when I decided to reveal myself. Standing up from my seat in the back row, I walked slowly toward the podium, feeling every eye in the room lock onto me. Victor froze, his mouth hanging open as if he couldn't believe I was stepping into the spotlight. Taking a deep breath, I addressed the crowd, not just as someone fighting for justice, but as someone whose family had been wronged for decades. "This land you live on," I said, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside me. "It belongs to my family. Your perfect streets, your manicured lawns, they were built on lies and theft. You've been paying fees to fund Victor's greed while he stole from all of us." Gasps rippled through the audience as I laid out the evidence Sarah and I had gathered. Forgery, bribery, corruption. By the time I finished speaking, Victor's empire was in ruins, and so was his reputation. The room was electric with tension as I finished speaking, my words hanging heavy in the air. For a moment, there was complete silence, so quiet you could hear the faint hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. Then, like a dam breaking, the crowd erupted. Residents shouted questions, accusations, and demands, their voices blending into a chaotic symphony of anger and disbelief. Victor Langston stood frozen at the podium, his face pale, his jaw clenched so tight it looked like it might crack. He tried to speak, but no one listened. The man who had ruled Ridgewood Estates with an iron fist for years was now powerless against the storm he had created. Margaret stepped forward next, holding up a folder filled with documents. "This isn't just hearsay," she said firmly, her voice cutting through the noise. "These are bank records, forged deeds, and emails proving exactly what's been happening here for decades." She handed copies to members of the HOA board, who glanced at them with wide eyes before passing them along like hot potatoes. One by one, even Victor's closest allies began to distance themselves, realizing they were sitting on a sinking ship. Tom added fuel to the fire by sharing stories from contractors who had worked on HOA projects only to be stiffed on payments. "They didn't just cheat homeowners," he said, pointing directly at Victor. "They cheated small businesses too, people who trusted them to do the right thing." Lisa followed, reading aloud testimonials from families crushed under mounting fines and fees. Her voice cracked with emotion as she described how the HOA had threatened to evict single mothers and elderly residents simply because they couldn't keep up with impossible demands. Victor finally managed to stammer out a response, though it came across as weak and defensive. "This is all lies," he snapped, slamming his hand on the podium. "You're being manipulated by outsiders who want to destroy this community." But his words fell flat. No one believed him anymore. Even his usual charm and confidence were gone, replaced by desperation and fear. That's when Sarah, the lawyer who had helped me uncover the truth, stood up. She held up a legal document that sent a collective gasp through the room. "This is a court order," she announced, her tone calm but commanding. "It freezes all assets belonging to the HOA pending a full investigation into these allegations. Additionally, it grants temporary control of Ridgewood Estates operations to an independent oversight committee until further notice." Pandemonium broke out. Some residents cheered, others cried, and a few stormed out in shock. Victor collapsed into his chair, defeated, as the board unanimously voted to remove him from power. His reign of greed and intimidation was over. In the days that followed, the changes were swift and sweeping. The Oversight Committee took charge, promising transparency and fairness. Fees were slashed, ridiculous rules were abolished, and families facing eviction were given a second chance. Margaret's expose made national headlines, shining a spotlight on the corruption that had plagued Ridgewood Estates for years. Contractors like Tom finally received payment for their work, while Lisa became a local hero for standing up for struggling families. As for me, I felt a mix of emotions: relief, satisfaction, and a deep sense of justice. The land wasn't fully returned to my family yet, but the courts were already reviewing the evidence. With Sarah's help, we were confident we'd win back every acre stolen from us. Standing on the hill overlooking the fields where I grew up, I allowed myself a rare moment of peace. The battle wasn't easy, but it was worth it. Together, we had taken down a corrupt system and proven that even the most powerful people can fall when you stand united. Months passed, and the once oppressive shadow of the HOA began to lift from Ridgewood Estates. The Independent Oversight Committee worked tirelessly to undo years of damage, implementing fair policies and restoring trust within the community. Residents who had lived in fear for so long now felt a renewed sense of ownership over their neighborhood. They formed committees to address concerns, organized events to rebuild connections, and even started a community garden where families could grow vegetables together. It was as if the entire place had taken a deep breath after holding it for decades. For me, the legal battle continued, but this time, I wasn't alone. Armed with undeniable evidence, forged documents, falsified deeds, and financial records exposing Victor's corruption, we stood strong in court. The judge ruled in our favor, declaring that the land stolen by the HOA would be returned to my family. Not just a small patch near the edge, but all 2,100 acres. The ruling sent shockwaves through Ridgewood Estates, cementing what many already suspected. The HOA's empire had been built on lies. Victor didn't walk away unscathed either. Investigations into his actions revealed not only fraud, but also embezzlement and bribery. He faced criminal charges, leaving him stripped of his wealth, reputation, and freedom. Watching him led out of the courtroom in handcuffs brought no joy. It wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. Justice for my mom, whose legacy he had tried to erase. Justice for the contractors he stiffed, the families he evicted, and the community he exploited. With the land finally back in our name, I made a decision that surprised some people. Instead of selling it or turning it into another gated community, I chose to preserve its soul. Parts of the acreage were set aside for conservation, protecting the rolling hills and lush fields that had defined our family for generations. Other sections were opened up to local farmers who wanted to cultivate crops sustainably, keeping Mom's dream alive. And a small portion became a public park, a gift to the residents of Ridgewood Estates, a way of saying thank you for standing with us when it mattered most. The transformation of Ridgewood Estates itself was remarkable. Freed from Victor's tyranny, neighbors began treating each other like actual neighbors. They shared meals, helped one another during tough times, and celebrated milestones together. Gone were the days of living under constant scrutiny. Instead, they embraced a simpler, kinder way of life. Margaret often joked that she'd never seen so many block parties in such a short amount of time. As for me, I found peace, not just in reclaiming the land, but in knowing we had made a difference. Every blade of grass, every tree, and every corner of that property reminded me of Mom's resilience and love. She hadn't fought her battles alone, and neither had I. Together, with the help of unexpected allies, we had taken on giants and won. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, I walked through the fields with Lily, my daughter. She ran ahead, laughing as she chased butterflies, while I trailed behind, taking it all in. This land wasn't just ours anymore. It belonged to everyone who had fought for it, to the residents who refused to stay silent, to the families who stood together against injustice, and to future generations who would inherit not just soil and grass, but a story of courage and hope. Standing there, surrounded by the beauty of the land and the laughter of my child, I whispered softly, "We did it, Mom." And for the first time in a long time, I believed it completely.